Am I on? Good evening. Thank you all for joining us, joining She Can Win for our Women's History event tonight. I am so excited about this program, and I am looking forward for you guys to hear these presentations as well as hear this panel discussion that I think would is going to be so dynamic with Representative Bullock and Representative Cephas, as well as Ashley McBride. And we have a great presentation from our E-Day partners. So I wanted to start right away. I'm going to give you a presentation for the 2020 State of Black Women Report. So Nyla, is the presentation up? I can't see anything. Thank you. All right. So next slide, Nyla. All right, so for this report, we used the qualitative data collection method. We had interviews with key stakeholders. There were 7 of them in total. We spoke with elected officials around Pennsylvania. So it was council members, Kendra Brooke out of Philadelphia, as well as Council Member Sherelle Parker. We spoke with Representative Joanna McClinton, Representative Donna Bullock, as well as Representative Morgan Cephas, and we also was able to speak with Latasha Mays and Khadija Kenner. For the next report, I am hoping to move the interview out some and kind of expand to different regions such as Erie, Pennsylvania, and Central Pennsylvania, such as Strasburg. But for the first report, these were a great group of women that I could not ask for better insight from. They had a lot of information, but one of the themes that I thought was so very important to note was that they all felt that Black women and girls were often left out of the conversation, no matter what focus area they felt was the most significant. So, some women spoke about economic development and some spoke about healthcare, but essentially they all thought that we were left out of the conversation. Another method that we used, data collection method that we used, was State Department reports. So from the Pennsylvania Health Department, as well as like our prison system, and from the Legislative Black Caucus. And then we also used scholarly journals and peer-reviewed articles for this report. One of them being the Status of Black Women report, which I thought was so helpful when doing this. All of the references that we used are on the report. I think we have about 5 pages of references because we wanted to be as thorough as possible. And like I said, moving forward, we do want to expand the conversation and kind of talk to more women in the field and things like that. So again, that was the collection method. I'm going to skip demographics for now because Khalida will speak about that during her presentation. Nyla, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So one of our focus areas is education. And what we found was that Black girls aspire to be leaders more than any other racial group. And because of that, we must nurture that. And so going into that conversation, we had to talk about Black girls and classroom suppression. Black girls are 5 times more likely than white girls to be suspended at least once, and 4 times as more likely to get arrested at school more than white girls. And this leads to Black girls, the over-disciplining of Black girls leads to Black girls graduating at lower rates than their white counterparts. But with that being said, Black women in higher education, 18.5% of Black women in the Commonwealth hold a bachelor's degree or higher. And this is significant because the degree is 6 times more likely to lift Black women out of poverty than just a high school diploma. So we are doing the work. We are here. Pennsylvania is, they said it was the worst third, so we still have work to do to get Black women into this next step. But we're there. And Black women are nearly 4.5% more likely to hold a bachelor's degree in comparison to Black men. So we'll talk about that dynamic a little later, but it is important information. Next slide. All right, so for the economics, in 2014, Black women made up nearly 60% of the labor force, but only 34% of managerial or professional occupations. The median annual earnings for Black women working full time is $27,000 for Black women with only a high school diploma, but $50,000 for Black women with a bachelor's degree or higher. As well as Black women make up 78% of single mothers who are breadwinners. And actually, Black women are 55% more likely to be breadwinners in any household, whether there are children or whether there's a husband present, they're 55% more likely to be the breadwinner. The cycle of poverty, the finding is that the takeaway in that finding is that it has generational impacts. When exposed to high level of poverty, Black children are 42 to 51% more likely to experience poverty in adulthood compared to 25% to 40% of their white counterparts. So it has lasting effects and more lasting effects than any other racial ethnic group. Pay inequity, pay equity in Pennsylvania, Black women make roughly 66 cents compared to the 78 cents compared to 78 cents white non-Hispanic men make. And this report is actually looking back from 2020. So, and the Pay Equity Day in 2020 was August 13th. We are doing far worse now, ladies. It's even worse now. So we are looking now, I think our Pay Equity Day is now in September. So with this new report, there's going to be some new findings that shows how much work we still have to do. With paid sick leave, Black women are more likely to be the breadwinners of their households. So sick days have significant consequences, such as being unable to provide food for your family. And they said about 3.5 days off is a month worth of groceries. So like I said, the cycle of poverty is just generational. Glass ceilings, we talked about Black women making strides, but again, Black women only make up 34% of managerial professional roles compared to 42% for white women. So there's still a little work to be done. And entrepreneurship, in 2018, Black women were ranked the fastest growing demographic of entrepreneurs in the United States, but Black ownership can bring Black women ownership can bring Black women increased control over their working lives and create financial opportunities. However, of course, there are many challenges, such as having less access to capital. Our businesses are typically a lot smaller, and they say it's a little less profitable. In 2012, the average business sales for Black women was $27,753, which is the lowest among all racial groups. Now, can you click to the next slide? All right, criminal justice. So I'm going to try to pick it up a little bit because I only gave myself a few minutes to kind of talk through this report, but I am, please feel free to drop any questions or comments. in the chat, and we will answer them at the end. So criminal justice, the shackling of Black women. Shackling of Black women has been banned since 2010, but we'll talk to Representative Cephas about a little bit more about this. But she helped to propose the Dignity for Incarcerated Act, for the Incarcerated Act, proposed with her and others. This act ends the shackling of pregnant women and provides access to free feminine hygiene products. Second, mental health in the Pennsylvania prison systems. Experts found that 7 out of 10 women in the prison system suffered from a mental health issue. Mental health issues include schizophrenia and bipolar. And I don't know if you guys know this, but the two Pennsylvania prisons have more prisoners than all of the mental health hospitals in Pennsylvania. So the beginning of reform, the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus introduced a package that ranges from healthcare and access, in the prison system to a benefits program for those re-entering society. So there's a lot of work being done in this sphere, particularly around women and Black women. Next slide, Nyla. Thank you. So healthcare, maternal infant mortality rate in Pennsylvania, we know that Black women are significantly affected by maternal infant mortality. Infant death toll for Black infants is 15% more than white infants. So, like I said, that's double. So it's 6%, and then it doubles to 15% for Black infants, which in general. The maternal mortality rate for Black women is 27%, which is triple the maternal mortality rate compared to white women. So I don't know about you, but that was one of the things that I found a little shocking. The solution, adding doulas and midwives to the birthing process, and getting more Black women maternal care in their first trimester. And then HIV/AIDS, Black women's HIV/AIDS rate is higher than any other ethnic group. Black people accounted for 49% of cases of HIV, with Black people accounted for 49% of cases of HIV, with Black women making up 59% of those cases. So it's significantly affecting us. Access to care. So again, it's just getting Black women access to the resources that they need. Representative Bullock, during her interview, stated that we are often left out of studies that can save our lives. And so a lot of that was talked about in the paper, and we hope that we can talk about that a little bit more during the panel discussion. Sorry, I had to start moving a little quicker because of the time. Nyla, can you move on to the next slide? So we have 5 issue areas. One of them is missing, environment. The reason why environment is missing is because we were unable to disaggregate the data by race. A lot of it is missing that piece that talks about Black women and how it affects us. Lastly, COVID-19 is not mentioned in this report because this report was in 2020. So our next report will be looking at 2021 and hopefully a little bit of 2022. And we will hopefully have that data that will talk more about what is currently happening. Final ask, we do need policy research interns to do this work. So if you guys know anyone who would be interested in working with She Can Win on the next report, please let us know. And lastly, can you share this report? There's a lot of good information that I think is needed And there's a lot of great information that I think a lot of Black women need to hear and need to know in order for us to protect Black women and support Black women. So that's the end of my presentation. I am going to hand it over to Kalita Barakat. She'll say her name right. I'm sorry, Kalita. I'm going to hand it over to talk about demographics.
Hi. So again, my name is Kalita Bearcat. So you got it pretty close. Once the slides come up, I can start. Okay, great. All right, so I assisted She Can Win with some data research and data modeling for Black women voters and white women voters in Pennsylvania. We can go to the next slide. All right, so again, my name is Kalita. I'm the co-founder and vice president of EDAP Incorporated. We are a full-service campaign and data services company. Our mobile app eDay is a copyrighted web and mobile app that collects, views, and analyzes real-time data. We also, as I stated, do data, and that's important because like companies like Nielsen, the Census Bureau, and even your local elected officials use canvassing and data to collect and needed information that they need. We work with a lot of different campaigns and nonprofits. And we understand that data is important when making decisions, as it provides the ability to see what is working, what isn't, and how to solve an issue. All right, so we can go to the next slide. All right, so so as I stated, we assisted with some comparison between Black and white women within the Commonwealth. Our research revealed that there are huge differences between Black and white women in Pennsylvania that need to be addressed. And our research also showed that, research also showed that women are the powerhouse voters that can change elections and public policy, especially Black women. So I will kind of sift through the data to show the differences in socioeconomic statuses, income ranges, education levels, age ranges, voting frequency, and home values. So we can go to the next slide. Great. All right, so what you're looking at is the socio-economic ladder and income. So when we are discussing this, we're basically talking about people's upward mobility to be successful. Socioeconomic ladder is the measure of a person's work experience, education of an individual or family's economic access to resources, and social position in relation to others. So our model for the socioeconomic ladder is graded from 0 to 8, with 0 being the lowest and 8 is the highest. The data shows that women who have access to education, work experience, and family economic access have a greater potential for more income, as well as just being better off in general. And we'll see with the next slide how education plays in the socioeconomic ladder. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is in regards to white women and their education. So as I stated, education can be the propelling factor for success in creating better family and societal structures. So this first slide, as I stated, is white women education levels in the Commonwealth. We can see in the charts that white women graduate with higher degrees. And as you'll see when I show the Black women one, at higher rates. And what the data doesn't show is the school systems, though, where they are graduating from. So what privileges they are provided, or things within their area that gives them more chances for them to be able to graduate. We also have seen a lack of investment in, like urban schools, and this can also be one of the factors that plays a huge part in higher academia levels for Black women. So as you can kind of see already, like with the high school diploma, that's about 400,000, and then even like just not completely completing college is still like over 200,000. And the next slide, you will show the significant difference in regards to that. Okay. So as you can see in regards to that, how it dwindles significantly. And again, just to reiterate, this is based on just the voter information for those who are active and inactive voters within the Commonwealth. And as you can see, just looking at the high school diploma, that's not even half of what's listed for white women within the Commonwealth. So as we can see, there is a lot that needs to be changed and a lot that needs to be done so we can get better in regards to that. Now, because this is just the voter, the numbers would be slightly more when we're including ones who when we are including ones that are not just the voters. But even then, there's still a huge gap in between education levels between Black and white women. We can go to the next slide. All right, so this data shows the ages of Black and white women within the Commonwealth. We do see that from the data, the white women are, that population is older, and the Black women are younger, with a majority of the white women being above 65 and older. And that information is significant in regards to like voting, because we also find, like specifically for Philadelphia, Black women are essentially like huge voters within Philadelphia. But on the scale of just PA as a Commonwealth, it's just slightly smaller in regards to that. Okay, we can go to the next. All right, so women voters, again, as I already stated, are the powerhouses, and that's why, you know, campaigns spend so much money advertising to them. The data does show that even though white women outnumber Black women voters, the data is similar, except that a larger population of white women do not vote. So we know from our data that when Black women voters back candidates, they can win with large turnouts. All right. And then that's just the other part of the voting frequency. You can go to the next slide. All right. All right, so the housing data, which I will quickly show between the Black women and white women, why this is in here is because we know that by data that having a home and being a homeowner is one of the greatest financial assets to have within America in itself. And unfortunately, with Black women, especially within the Commonwealth, there is, in regards to voters, again, there's still a smaller percentage. I want to kind of point out, I guess, like the average homes, which will probably be anywhere between 175 to 199. It's only about 26,000. And as you kind of get lower in values, that goes up. And I would be one to say that I would assume is that the good thing with that would be maybe a reflection of those getting homes passed down from their family members, and they were able to stay in the homes and pass it on with that. And then we could go to the next slide. And then again, as you can see with white women in the Commonwealth, those numbers double, if not triple, in regards to home ownership. And so it's just very important, like Ladisha was saying, was that we still have a lot of work to do. And it also shows the gaps, the huge gaps in between the demographics within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, and any questions, please let me know. Yes. Oh, Ladesha, I think you on mute.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know all this technology. Thank you so much, Kalita. That was so important for me to share with this group. So like I said, we will continue the partnership.
Yes,
and I look forward to working with you in the future.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so we're going to move on to our panel discussion, and we have three dynamic women joining us this evening, and I'm so excited for this conversation. I want to introduce Ashley McBride, Representative Donna Bullock, and Representative Morgan Cephas. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I wanted to jump right into it because I think that this report was one of Jasmine's babies that she left us, and I hope that she find this report very insightful. But I wanted to hear, after reading this report, what do you make of the state of Black women in Pennsylvania? So I will start with Representative Cephas.
First and foremost, thank you so much for having me to be a part of today's conversation. And thank you for putting this report together. It's not too often do we get an opportunity to take, a deeper dive into one, how Pennsylvanians are doing as a whole, but specifically target to Black women. And, it was said throughout this entire conversation that the Democratic Party, both parties oftentimes say, we are the backbone of their party. And, when it comes time to actually put forth policy and put forth an agenda, it never really reflects, our priorities. And, a lot of the research and the data points that had, surfaced, in the report are some of the things that we've known for some time as Black women. And I think, again, none of it was, too shocking. I think as more and more Black women get an opportunity to sit at, tables, policy tables, to one, not only tell our story, but, to, represent that lived experience of Black women across Pennsylvania, that's when you'll see some, significant change from a policy perspective. So, I think the report was spot on at the state of women in Pennsylvania. I'm glad that it uplifted so much of the work that we are doing collectively as Black women in Pennsylvania in the General Assembly, but it also made some recommendations as to, how we can make the lives of Black women, so much better than what they currently are. Because again, we have made significant strides over the years, over the decades. I mean, fastest growing population, becoming entrepreneurs, getting post-secondary, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. But there are some significant areas where we are still struggling. And again, as we approach the midterm elections, we want to make sure that our bodies aren't just used to get to, the polls and to get out the vote, but that our policy priorities are on the menu and, not, being looked over once, people get elected.
Great. I'll jump in here and just echoing everything that my sister rep said. This report isn't necessarily news to us as Black women. We are living all of those data points that were discussed in the report. What it was, I think, was more of an affirmation of that experience, right? To see it in writing, to see the numbers, because often we aren't included in the reports. We aren't including in the research studies. We aren't included in the statistics that are shared across this Commonwealth when we're talking about the needs or challenges or even successes of Pennsylvanians. And so to see that and understand and to see it all in context, this was a report solely dedicated to the lives of Black women in Pennsylvania, not talking about other folks, not talking about other populations, but us and how each of these different areas, education, economics, healthcare, how all those things impact our lives. And of course, moving forward. Now, I think I saw a comment, about if you're not invited to the table, bring your own chair. I will say we need to build our table, and we have the resources to do that. We have the talent and the skills to do that. Sometimes the table ain't the right table. So we need to build a table and then bring the chairs and invite people to our table. And so I look forward to working with She Can Win and others who have been a part of this report to take it to the next level, to continue to look deeper and even further into how we can import or support Black women in the work that we're doing here in the Commonwealth. what it reminded me is a piece of legislation that I'm working on in Harrisburg to require that we have impact statements for legislation. When we pass legislation, Rep. Cephas and I will tell you every time we go to appropriations meetings or we review a bill, we usually see a fiscal note. We know how legislation impacts those dollars in the state. What we often don't know is how legislation impacts people, and specifically people of color. And so this is the kind of information that helps inform us when we're passing legislation to make sure that we're thinking how this legislation may impact, for this conversation, specifically Black women, how it may impact our children, how it may impact our families. And so that kind of information is so valuable to us as legislators. So I really appreciate the work and the effort of the She Can Win team for putting this together. And I look forward to the updates.
Good evening. Certainly, thank you to She Can Win and being here with Representative Bullock and Representative Cephas. I'm here tonight as one of their background singers. It brings my heart great pleasure to sit here with them. I'm thinking about all the work they've done. Representative Bullock talked about, oftentimes we aren't included in this report, these types of reports. And even though we talk about these experiences, we often even hear other people try to describe the experiences. So when I was reading the report, I don't think there's anything that caught me off guard, because again, it is so many of our lived experiences. And even if we have not had every one of them, we know some woman that has been impacted in some way, whether it is our mother or our grandmother or a sister or aunt or a cousin or just a neighbor or a random stranger that we have met. I think in reading the report, I thought really referenced Janelle Jones, who came up with Black Women Best, which essentially argued that Black women since our nation's founding have been amongst the most excluded and exploited by the rules and structure of our society. And so again, how can we talk about us thriving when we're not a part of it? And so seeing folks like Representative Bullock and Representative Cephas go and fight every day in Harrisburg to make sure that their voices are lifted up, because the only way policies change, again, we talk about having a seat at the table, whether we build a table, whether we come with our own table, because we often know that we can come to the meeting, but often these decisions are made at the meeting before the meeting or the meeting after the meeting. And so if we're not in those spaces, if we're not holding power, and we can't be simply used as something that's transactional, that folks are showing up days before, weeks before an election saying, hey, vote for me, when the reality is that most of our candidates who we talk about progressive causes and issues are there. They're elected because Black women show up consistently. And so again, certainly thank you to She Can Win again. And I look forward to be further in this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. So you all kind of touched on my next question. You said that nothing shocked you from this report. And I can believe that. But for me, I wanted to I'm going to jump from that question, and I'm going to go, what are your current thoughts on the state of Black women in regards to policies? Because I think a lot of the times, especially when I was working on these reports, is that we are left behind in these conversations and in these policy areas. So what are your take on that? How do you feel about that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it goes back to, some of the things I think I heard Rep. Cephas said, that we need to take this information and work on the policies. This is not enough to just throw out the data. I'll call it, just number after number, because we need to go beyond the numbers. We need to go beyond the statistics. And so some of the things that we've been working on definitely was highlighted in the report, like the dignity for incarcerated women that Rep. Cephas has been a champion on. Maternal health, again, Rep. Cephas has been a champion on. I'm still in all your shine and thunder here, but Rep. Cephas has been amazing in a lot of these issues. And then, we are having a conversation tomorrow about Black women and student loan debt, and there are so many other pieces of policy that I think can impact the lives of Black women. One of the things that I focused on is, and repeatedly focused on, is an economic theory from an economist that is actually in the Biden administration that's called Black Women Best. And when we put Black women first, when we focus on legislation and policies that make sure Black women do their best, guess what? We all do better. We all, we all succeed. We all achieve more because we already know that Black women are generally at the bottom of some of these priorities. But when we make her a priority, when we make sure she can feed her family, when we make sure she can use that high education and degree that she has been achieved, and she's able to, break the glass ceiling and sit at the tables and have the C-suite and all of those amazing things. When we do that for Black women, all of Pennsylvania does better. And I think, so if we increase the minimum wage, which was highlighted in the report, we can no longer stay at $7.25 an hour when every state that touches our border has a higher minimum wage, including West Virginia. But when we do that, when we increase the minimum wage, so many Black women and their families would be impacted, and so many others too, who are also minimum wage workers. When we address the health inequities that were highlighted in this report, so many Black women will do better, and so will everybody else who also is suffering from some of these health inequities in our rural counties that don't have access to health care, who benefited greatly from things like telehealth during the pandemic. So I think as we look at each of these policies that come before us as legislators or as state decision makers in our state agencies, when we do those things with the interests of Black women in the forefront, we're bettering the lives of all Pennsylvanians, and I truly believe that.
I mean, I absolutely agree when we talk about what happens with policy. I've often been very transparent about my own story. I was a young mother. I went to college. My student loans were actually taken to pay for childcare. I remember times when I didn't qualify. I didn't have health insurance. I didn't qualify. And so we made tremendous strides, but we know that there are Black women who continue to suffer. And while we often, those of us, even in this space, talk about not being a monolith, the reality is that Black women care about the same thing that white women care about, and white men and Black men and whoever. And so our issues are still very relevant. As Representative Bullock talked about, increasing the minimum wage and really closing the wage gap, period. The reality is that Black women still make far less than a white man and a white woman. And even when we look at our counterparts that are Asian American and Latinx, the reality is that there's still a wage gap that exists. There's no reason why people should be having to work 2 and 3 and 4 jobs just simply to make ends meet. And the reality is that impacts our health, our mental health, our emotional and well-being, and it impacts our children. We talk about what this means for generations. When we look and visit folks who have housing security, how it has existed from generation to generation. And so those of us who are working hard to break those generational, really what some people have characterized as curses, the reality is that the level, the playing field isn't level. And so again, it still goes back to making sure that there are more Black women in the room who are part of the decision making and who can lift those voices and those issues specifically. And as Representative Bullock has said, these issues aren't just about taking and lifting Black women out of poverty, but again, when you do that for Black women, it benefits everyone. So increasing the minimum wage, I think, is really critical in the work in my organization. We talk about the barriers to employment, being able to find affordable childcare. Again, even in all the strides that we've made, what we have seen under the Biden administration, the reality is that this is still a challenge for so many women, particularly Black women. And when we talked about the number of breadwinners who are Black women who are providing the sole support for their children and their households, what this means. When we talk about reproductive health and the barriers that we face over and over, and even the number of doctors and institutions who are not held accountable for what they do to Black women and to their bodies. When we talk about voter suppression efforts that, again, disproportionately target Black people, but they target Black women because they know that when we show up, we show out and we make a difference. I think all of these things are important to ongoing conversations. And again, certainly happy to be sitting here with 2 champions tonight.
Well, it is difficult going behind these two. But I mean, one thing that I would just definitely add is, Black women, we have had a significant policy agenda for some time. And, one of the things that I feel like, we've been talking about our challenges, we've been highlighting data points. And, one of the things that it's going to be critical, excuse me, as I have my coworker here, But one of the things that's going to be critical is that we need action. We need, it's far time, just past the time for us to be having conversations about what will uplift Black women. And we need to see something actually transpire once people get in office. So, and I know Rep. Bullock brought up dignity for incarcerated women, as well as, the issue of maternal mortality, which is something that I know we'll talk about a little bit later in this conversation. But, we've introduced legislation, we've introduced bills to address all of these policy issues that impact Black women directly. But, naturally with, a General Assembly that is controlled by Republicans, we're not able to get a lot of movement on that because, again, we aren't the majority. I think we're maybe 9 or 10 members in the General Assembly. So it's not going to be, are we 9? Yes. I lose track. We go back and forth between 9 and 10. And, because we aren't in the majority, we don't have those that have our lived experiences. So that it's not a priority for them. But because of that, as Black women, we don't have the luxury of not delivering for our community. So one way that we, make sure that we see progress is by pivoting to, from a legislative standpoint to the administration. So, having that conversation with our governor, who's a Democratic governor, and getting a sense as to what is it that he can do specifically as his role as the executive to move the agenda for Black women. And we've seen some strides in that we'll talk about a little bit further down in this conversation. But just to elevate, one thing for an example is, again, the Dignity for Incarcerated Women bill. A lot of the bills that were included in this package had just become incorporated into how the Department of Corrections handles, women while they are incarcerated. So, everything doesn't necessarily have to go through the legislative process, and that should never be an excuse or a reason why we can't move an agenda for Black women. We just need to ensure that we're looking at all sides, every opportunity to move that needle and make sure that we, make it a requirement as, to when they're trying to get our support, how are you going to move on these issues and outside of the legislative process? So I think, again, as we uplift all of these issues and these policy concerns, we have an ability to move the needle. It's just, do we have the will and muster when it comes to the executive branch?
Okay, so 2 things. Please feel free to drop your questions in the comment section. But I'm going to go on to my next question. And you kind of touched on it a little bit. It's how do you think all levels of government can work together to improve the conditions of Black women?
Well, Rep. Cephas really gave us the framework right there, right? We have to not just work within the legislature. As she mentioned, we only have 9 Black women out of 253 representatives and state senators to be voices for Black folk, for Black women particularly. And while we are in leadership roles, let's not forget that of those 9 Black women, we have the first Black woman leader of the Democratic caucus in the House. We have, I'm chairing the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus. Representative Cephas is co-chairing the Women's Health Caucus. So Black women are in leadership. Even the 9 of us have found ways to be in leadership within that space. Right. And then, so we've been able to leverage that influence, not just within the legislature, but with the executive branch. Whether it's talking with the governor's office and his team, or meeting individually with each secretary from every department about different issues. We sat down, the Black Caucus and the Women's Health Caucus with Rep. Cephas leadership. We sat down with the Health Department secretary over the matter of the last year and a half to discuss a WIC contract that we felt was being RFP'd in a way that was disadvantaging Black women-led organizations. And WIC is a program for women and infant children, a nutrition program that can really impact the lives of many Black families, but families, period, across the Commonwealth. But our leadership helped direct how that process went and had the department go back and take a second look and make sure they were doing this in a proper way to be inclusive and fair to all of the interested contracting parties. And that's because of Black women coming to the table and saying, we got questions. We want to make sure this is being done in an ethical way, in the right way, in a fair way, so that the services that this contract is responsible for gets to the families and the people it's supposed to serve, the communities that we see come into our office that need this assistance for nutrition in their families. We wanted to make sure it's done properly. That's just one example in which we worked not just as legislators, but as advocates within the state government, to make sure that all levels of government are engaged, and all branches of government are engaged, right? There's branches, the judicial and the legislative and executive, and then working with our court, judges on the court. I mean, we've been able to bring 2 Black women into higher benches in the court with Judge Lori Dumas and Judge Carolyn Nichols, and they're going to be great voices for us in the appeals and appellate court levels and other court levels in Pennsylvania. Hopefully we can get one to the PA Supreme Court at one point. I know we're all rooting for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson in DC. But there's more work for us to do, even in our local city councils, and where we have Black women, at least here in Philadelphia, but in all of the other counties and boroughs and mayors. We have a number of Black women mayors now in Pennsylvania, in Harrisburg and in Gettysburg. They have Black woman mayors, and there's some smaller townships around Pittsburgh with Black women serving as mayors. And so we need to support that leadership. And work together, work through that network of Black women leaders from those local governments, through state government, right on through to DC. And hopefully we can get our sister rep Summer Lee to Congress as well. And so that's the kind of leadership that I'm looking for. But I think working within those different spaces to make sure change happens. Rep Cephas, I think, is a great example of this. And I really admire the way she works, because if you're not too concerned about getting credit because your name is on a bill, and you're more concerned about getting the job done, good Lord, how much more work we could get done if we're not concerned about getting credit and having our name on a bill. And Rep Cephas is a great example of someone who works behind the scenes to get things done because she wants to make sure she improves the lives of the folks in her district, but a woman in general across the Commonwealth. And a lot of that is because she hasn't put her name on a bill. She's just got the work done.
No, and I definitely appreciate that. And I think that is where a lot of the work, gets done. It's finding issues where, I mean, again, Democrats and Republicans, we don't agree on much. But when you find an issue that's impacting Black women, white women, rural, suburban, urban, you really look to see where you can find common ground on issues. And, you just, not to cuss, but you push like hell with as much policy that you can come together on as much as possible to really just impact, Pennsylvanians. And, when you ask about local, state, and federal, every level of government, one of the things that I always urge people to ask when a policymaker states, that's a city issue or, that's a federal issue, I always want them to ask the question, well, what specifically in your role can you do to impact this issue? So I know we're having a conversation about student loan debt and how that impacts Black women. So, a lot of us have private student loans. A lot of us have federal student loans. So you're thinking, well, what can a state do? What can, our local municipality do? And, one of the things that, I push, policymakers and, residents to think about is like, well, what specifically do these level of governments have control over? One thing, for example, we have control of our tax credits. I mean, we're always given a tax break out to a business, a company, for vouchers. I mean, we're giving tax breaks out to people. So how about carve or create a tax credit or a tax break for individuals that have student loans? So it's almost like, using every level of government, having an understanding as to what they control and how they can think outside of the box to get to the crux of the issue. And I think that's really how, every level of government should approach issues related to Black women, because again, and I'm going to keep stressing this throughout this conversation, is, Black women being the backbone of the party, policy agendas and policy successes should reflect our needs at the polls. And, whether that be from an economic perspective, healthcare, or, all of the issues that impact us on a day to day, how are they prioritized every single year when we are, offering budgets? A budget is a blueprint as to what a society cares about. So if you say you care about and prioritize Black women, how is it prioritized as you're doing your budget proposal? Or again, things might not go through legislatively, but how are we prioritized with the policies that are made, from the executive branch? And I think that is a question that needs to be asked at every single level of government: is how are you prioritizing, and what successes have you seen as a result of your leadership that will have a direct impact, not on people of color, but Black women specifically? Because that's, again, who you are asking to save the country election after election.
Thank you. I am going to move on. Oh, did you want to say something, Ashley?
No, I think they've said it all, but I was just saying, for those of us who are not elected, the reality is that we show up by realizing that our voice has power, but also making sure that we are backing sisters who are in these positions and we're offering support in a real way. Also writing checks to them to make sure that they can win. Okay, I just threw that out there.
Well, you said it, not us.
I'm like, oh. This question is for Representative Cephas. Black maternal infant mortality is increasingly high, as the report displays. Can you talk more about the work that you are doing in this space, and can you expand on the doula programs that you are working on?
Absolutely. Phenomenal question. This has been, to, the young lady's point, how we get a lot of, policy focus is through advocacy and through the advocates. I've only been in the maternal mortality space, I would say maybe 2 or 3 years. And it was brought to my attention at a roundtable discussion with Senator Bob Casey, and a young woman brought up, Donna, you were there, a young lady brought up the issue about what is the Commonwealth doing about maternal mortality. And I literally had a blank face because I knew nothing about it. But, as electeds, naturally, we're going to take a deeper dive into topics. And that was around the time that the Times Magazine article came out. Serena Williams had done a humongous expose with HBO. And I actually had a young lady in my district recently pass away on the delivery table while she was, actually giving birth. So that's what, really made me take a deeper dive into the issue. And, just looking at, what advocates were asking for. You saw also what then Senator Kamala Harris was doing on the subject on the, in the congressional level. So, you already had the blueprint literally laid out, like what states need to do to reverse our trends. And, we have recently produced, a report that stated between 2013 and 2018, you saw a 21% increase in maternal mortality deaths that occur. So we were just definitely trending in the wrong direction. And there was recently a New York Times article that said, we had a 14% increase during COVID-19. And, last statistic, and not to throw all this, at you, but Black women here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania represented 14% of the deaths. 14% of the births, but 21% of the deaths. So, overrepresented in these statistics. And, again, leaning on the advocates that have been in this work for some time, they elevated several things that states could do to really reverse these trends. And one was extending Medicaid up to a year postpartum. We learned that roughly around 51% of the deaths, the maternal mortality deaths, occurred during the postpartum period. And prior to the Medicaid extension, individuals were only able to stay on Medicaid 60 days after they had given birth. So just imagine a new birthing person having to take care of a young person, and completely getting kicked off of their healthcare after 60 days. It's traumatic. And, having to navigate a new healthcare system, let alone take care of yourself, take care of the newborn, is, a lot to, shoulder immediately after giving birth, pretty much. So, that was one of the things that, had been offered for some time. And, thankful again to VP Kamala Harris and they're championing putting Medicaid extension and the American Rescue Plan. You now have states that are able to, adopt the Medicaid extension and offer that benefit to people. And Pennsylvania, not all states are doing it, but Pennsylvania will be enacting that literally in 2 days on April 1st. But one of the other issues that advocates had elevated was extending the perinatal workforce. And that included certifying and licensing doulas. For some time that, we've introduced legislation, session after session, and it had literally had gotten in nowhere. But because of, our governor, he, understood the importance and, thought that this is something that we should just adopt from, the executive branch. And, we are in the process of doing that. And, really what that does, there's a Pennsylvania doula commission that is, writing the rules and regs around certification, licensing, and more importantly, reimbursements, because, we don't want to create yet another career pathway that's offering this opportunity and, having people, be in poverty, paying them $7.25 an hour. So, we have doulas that have been on the ground leading the charge and, pretty much articulating what this framework should look like here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So that is something coming down the pike as well.
Thank you. Thank you. My last and final question, I know we only have 3 minutes, is for Representative Bullock. Our 5th focus area is environment. We could not adequately disaggregate the data to show how environmental injustice affects Black women. So we did have to remove the section for now. We do want to bring it back. Can you talk more about some of your environmental justice work and how it may affect Black women in the Commonwealth?
Right. Thank you for that question. And I get it. Environmental justice is a very complex issue. And I say that because environmental justice isn't just about what we traditionally think of when we think of environmental issues. It's not just about the water and the air. It is very much so about that. But our environment is so much more. It is the air that we breathe in our homes, the air that we breathe in our schools, the air that we breathe in our workplaces. It is the structure of our homes that may be that there may be toxins in our homes in different ways. Your home can very well be making you sick. The playground you take your children can be making you sick. Environmental justice has a lot to do with everything that is around you. And so when I think of environmental justice, yes, I think of those traditional environmental issues that we all think of, in garbage incinerators and gas lines and all those kinds of things. But I also think in gas power plants, but I also think about gun violence in my community. And that is an environmental justice issue. When I think about dumping in my community, that is an environmental justice issue. And when I think about stormwater damage and whether or not the streets can take in water in my community, whether we have enough stormwaters, whether drainage, whether those drains are clear, that is an environmental justice issue. When we talk about how it can be hotter or cooler in one area of the city, depending on the amount of tree canopy, that is also an environmental justice issue. The decision to have children in a space or in a world that may not be, the environments may not be conducive to their well-being is an environmental justice issue. And for Black women, when we know that our children have the highest rates of asthma because of air pollution, environmental justice issue for Black women. And so I have been looking a lot at just having Black communities at the table, or building our own tables when it comes to conversations about environmental justice, making sure that folks know it's not just about saving whales and butterflies. It is about what our daily environment looks like every single day, whether you're in Philadelphia or Erie, and what it looks like to make sure that you can live the healthiest life and your children can have the most healthiest life, and that you can do that and have influence over the decisions made by government that impacts that environment. And so there's a lot of work to do in this space. There's so many ways in which our natural and built environments impact our public health and impact our well-being and ability to succeed as well. It is every space that you can possibly think of. But for many Black folks, it's beyond the natural environment. It does very much include that built environment around us, the housing stock, the density of our communities, on the unfortunate rise of gun violence in our communities, and how that impacts our health, our well-being, and the quality of our life. And so I look forward to ongoing conversations. We introduced a Black Caucus environmental justice legislative package back in October, and I won't say celebration, but in alliance with the celebration of the 30th anniversary of the national adoption of the environmental justice principles. Speaking of working with other bodies of government, the governor at the same time introduced an executive order mirroring much of what we had in our legislative package to move that forward. And we hope to continue to work on it. That package included codifying the Office of Environmental Justice, a environmental justice advisory board across the state, as well as looking at the permitting process through the Department of Environmental Protection to make sure there's community involvement and engagement in deciding which facilities and companies get permits to operate within our communities that may have a health impact on those communities. So it's a great conversation, and I look forward to seeing how She Can Win tackles that subject in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. We are over time. I want to say I am just truly amazed by all three of you ladies. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This conversation has been, I've been taking my notes, so the next report I'm going to be ready, and I hope that we can talk with you guys in the future. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to wrap up. We are hosting, I have to make this announcement. We are hosting a 2-day training on May 21st and May 22nd. It is our She Can Win training that has helped propel some of all of our favorites, and I am looking forward to that. And please send it out, share it with anyone who you know is interested in leading civic engagement or running for elected office or wanting to be a staffer. We need more Black women in those spaces as well. Again, thank you all. I want to thank Ashley McBride for our futures, Representative Donna Bullock, Representative Morgan Cephas, Khalida Barakat from E-Day, and thank you to She Can Win Board and Nyla Ford and Don Miller for all of your help with everything. Thank you all, and have a good night.